Whenever we discuss RGB light panels, for me there's always been one standout option on the market, the Bowling P1. Well, now there's potentially a new contender on the block. This, the Falcon Eyes F7 Fold. Straight away it's pretty apparent this is two light panels with some hinges connecting them to allow it to fold in half. So this means that you can have folded out one large light panel for extra light, but then that's obviously quite big to have to carry around with you, so you can fold it in half, make it easier to transport. Also means in theory you can have different light going in different directions, so you could have, say, coloured light going one way, or white light going in a different way, or a different colour going in a different way, so you can mix and match things. Also with the F7 Fold, you get several light modifiers in the box as well. So the first is this one, which I think was actually designed to be like a diffuser that goes over the panel, but I found it actually works really well at covering up your bald spots. Secondly are these rubberized honeycombs. These just simply slide over the panel, one on each half. So rather than a very spread out light that goes all over the place, instead you get a much more controlled light. Now it's obviously nowhere near as bright as without the honeycomb on, but it's certainly a lot easier to kind of target at a very small specific area. However, with the honeycombs on, you can't fold the light down properly. These rubber straps get in the way. And I'll be honest, I don't actually use these honeycombs at all. When I've been using this light with a diffuser, I've opted for this one instead, which is a full panel size honeycomb grid, which I prefer this over the honeycomb because whilst it still cuts down the light, maybe not as much as the honeycomb, you get a lot more light. So it's still far more controlled than without a diffuser, but for me personally, this one works a lot better. However, I do believe that in the standard cheapest packet of the F7 Fold, this modifier isn't included. I think this comes in the next kit up that's a little bit more expensive. Now this isn't a perfect diffuser either. Firstly, it can only work when the whole panel is fully open, so you can't just use like a half a panel like you can with the rubber honeycombs. And secondly, as you might have spotted, trying to get into the controls here down the side can be a little bit fiddly because you kind of have to squeeze your finger between the diffuser and the light panel. So it's not particularly brilliant for trying to change settings on the fly. But generally when I've used this light panel, I've used it just as a kind of rim light there. So it works for that. Also in the box you get this travel pack. So you can fit the F7 Fold inside there, and then there's another front pouch which lets you put some of the modifiers in. So that might be quite handy if you're taking the light out a lot. Now, back on to the Fold itself. So the first thing you notice about this when you get it out the box is just how heavy the thing feels. Compared to the Bowling P1, this thing is ridiculous. Well, case in point, a Bowling P1 weighs 260 grams. So two Bowling P1s side by side like this would still only weigh 520 grams. This thing weighs 745 grams. Now I think one of the main reasons why this weighs so much more than the Bowling's is the battery. The Bowling P1 battery is a 2,930 milliamp hour battery, whereas this is fitted with two 3,800 milliamp hour batteries. Obviously, one battery in each panel. Now that larger battery capacity, whilst adding more weight to the whole thing, does also mean longer battery life. So the Bowling P1, when I first got that, I ran a test on it and I was able to get just over 3 hours at 100% brightness before the light gave up. When testing this, after 3.5 hours, I gave up. Well, actually, I didn't give up. The camera gave up and my phone had given up several times as well. And this thing was still showing half battery on the indicator. Now, admittedly, the indicators aren't the most accurate. It's just a little 4-bar indicator, and I don't genuinely think this was at 50% when I switched it off. So it's not like 3.5 hours, 50%, it's going to run for 7 hours. I think realistically it would be more like maybe 4.5 hours that it would manage at 100%, which is still impressive considering Falcon Eyes only rate it to do 150 minutes at 100% brightness, so 2.5 hours. So it well surpassed what Falcon Eyes claimed it would manage. Which incidentally, by the way, in case you're wondering about the figures, the color temperature range on this is 2500 Kelvin up to 9000 Kelvin. By comparison, the Bowling P1 will do 2500 up to 8500. So you get an extra 500 Kelvin in the color temperature range on the F7 Fold versus the Bowling P1. Now, in terms of brightness output, the F7 Fold as a whole is rated for 10,700 lux at 0.3 of a meter, so just over 5,000 lux per panel. By comparison, the standard F7 is only rated for 4,000 lux at 0.3 of a meter. The Bowling P1s are also rated at about 4,000 lux, but that's 4,000 at a half a meter, not 0.3. I've tested this, or one of these panels, versus a single Bowling P1. The outputs are exactly the same, which was a real surprise for me because the light panel of the Bowling P1 is a physically smaller area than this, so I assumed that this would have a slightly brighter output. So I think the larger batteries are a big contributor to the additional weight. Another aspect as well is that under the skin there are magnets. Now, these are not just so that they clip together when you close the thing over. They do also work in allowing you to mount this light up against metallic surfaces. And despite the weight of this thing as well, the magnets do seem to hold it up pretty well. I have noticed on some surfaces that there's a little bit of slip sometimes. Maybe it might struggle a little bit, but for the most part, it seems to hold up very well. Just given the weight of this thing, I wouldn't trust like magnetizing it over my head or anything. So there is quite a bit of weight to this, so it might not be the most ideal light if you're planning on traveling around with it a lot. However, that additional weight does at least give the impression of some really solid build quality. Now, I've always maintained that the Bowling P1 feels like a very well-built light. It feels very solid. Well, if the Bowling P1 feels like a brick, this thing feels like a tank. Genuinely, if I had an armor-piercing tank shell, I'm pretty sure it would bounce off this thing. Even the hinges, no sign of give whatsoever. It doesn't feel like they're about to snap in half or anything. Now, not only do you get the same RGB mode as the Bowling P1, where you can select a certain degree on the hue wheel and then also change the saturation and the luminance independent of each other, which basically opens you up to any color that you want. You also get some other modes. So you get a different RGB mode, which lets you dial in literally from 0 to 255 on the red, the green, and the blue channel. It gives you the same colors as the normal hue controls, but it's just a different way of going about it. So maybe you're trying to dial in a particular color and you only know what the 3 channel colors are. Rather than having to try and kind of trial and error the hue wheel to find the exact match for it, you can just literally dial in RGB channels between 0 and 255. There's also 2 other modes which I honestly knew nothing about until I tested this light, and those are Lee and Roscoe. Now, after a little bit of research, what I found is that both Lee and Roscoe make color gel filters for lights, but they have their own specific colors, and those colors correspond to their own unique codes. Well, Falcon Eyes have pre-programmed some of those colors into the light panel. So for example, this is Lee color 701, this is 194, 603, 243, and so on. We switch into Roscoe, this is color E153, or 165, or E724, or R93. There's a whole host of preset colors that will match Lee and Roscoe filters. which if you're someone that uses Leo Roscoe filters, that could be a fantastic feature. Admittedly, I don't use Leo Roscoe features, so they're neither use nor ornament to me. Now, there's also some other program features in there, which I'll show you in a second, but the next one I want to show you is their app. Now, the app does let you control each half of the light individually. So if I click on device here, you can see that I've actually got two separate devices, which is two halves of the same light panel. Or you can create a group where you put the two devices in the one group, and then whatever changes you then make occur on both panels. And incidentally, you can control more than one F7 fold at a time. So you could have several F7 folds, which again, you could operate as individual devices or put them into one huge group if you want to. So then in the app, we have obviously here the hue wheel, and then you can adjust the luminance there as well. You've got the color temperature modes, which gives you some preset color temperatures, or you can dial in your own. Then we have scenes. Now these are special effect lighting scenarios, which again, the Bowling P1 has some of these, like some lightning effects or an emergency services, but there's far more in the F7 Fold. So we have lightning, or lightning 2, or screen, in case you want to make it look like you're watching telly. There's candlelight, or there's what is supposed to be camera flashes, although they've actually spelt it fallish. Or there's a strobe, in case you want to have an epileptic fit. Or there's a heartbeat. I didn't know heartbeats could have a colour, but okay. Or there's police, or a fire truck, or an ambulance. You can have a red strobe. You could have a green strobe. And shock horror, you can even have a blue strobe. You can have a party 1, or you can have a party 2, or you can have a full RGB strobe. That is doing some funky numbers on the wall. And then the last feature on the app is one called Picture. And when you click on this, it accesses the camera on your phone, and you might be able to see there's a little like target marker in the middle there, and a picture of an eyedropper in the bottom. And what you do with this is you point the camera at a particular area, so it picks up a particular color, so we'll get like the green up there, and then you press on the target marker, and it turns the light on to that particular color. Likewise, if I go up there for the red, we get more of a red. And if I go down here for the blue, we get a blue light. So that lets you kind of immediately match that light to any other color object or any other light in the room. Now that could be a particularly handy feature to have, because what I have noticed in testing out the F7 is that the color, the hues appear to be slightly different to the likes of the Bowling P1. For example, the Bowling P1 behind me is set to hue 230 degrees. That's the blue that I always go for in my videos. If I use the Andy Cine AL360, which is up on the top shelf currently shining red, if I set that to the same hue color as the Bowling P1, it produces exactly the same color. However, if I set the F7 Fold to 230 degrees, it comes out as more of a teal color. To get the same kind of richness of blue off that, I have to go to about hue 236. So there is no doubt the F7 Fold is a very impressive piece of kit. It's a substantial light with some exceptional battery life and is fully packed with features. In terms of price for this, you might be wondering. It's currently on Amazon UK for £259, or on Amazon.com it's $269. By comparison, the Bowling P1 is £135 UK or $149 US, which means to buy a pair of Bowling P1s to equal this would be £270 UK or just under $300 US. And it's also worth bearing in mind that the Bowling P1s wouldn't come with all the light modifiers that the F7 does. Now, really, my biggest gripe with this is the fact that it is essentially two separate light panels just hinged together. They're not connected to each other at all. What I mean by that is they don't share power, they don't share controls. So when you want to charge this up, okay, it's using USB Type-C ports, which is great, but it's got a port on each panel and they charge independently of each other, which means that when you want to charge this up, you either have to run two power cables to it, so two chargers, or you have to charge one and then charge the other. And the same with the controls. Both panels have their own sets of controls and they operate independently of each other, which then kind of opens up the question, is it worth buying one F7 Fold or two separate LED light panels? Because whether you buy this or two separate panels, you still have to charge them both up separately. You still have to control them both separately. However, the two separate light panels, you can either put them next to each other behaving like this, or they're disconnected from each other. You can put them in two separate places, like on, say, two different shelves, where you can't do that with this. The only advantage that I can see to this setup versus two separate light panels is the fact that you can mount both of them in the same spot at the same time. So for example, in the past when I've put them on a stand there, I only need the one stand and I can put both light panels. If I wanted to do that with two separate light panels, I'd either have to get two stands right next to each other, which wouldn't look brilliant, or I'd have to get very creative in trying to, say, tie wrap two light panels together. Well, there's arguments for both really here, isn't there? But for me personally, I would prefer two bowling P1s versus this. Now, that's not to say this is a bad light, far from it. It's an exceptional light, but it's exceptional in the wrong areas for what I need. But if you're someone who specifically wants a larger light panel than a bowling P1, not just I'll shine two different lights off in two different directions. If you need that larger light panel, if you're going to be needing a light source that runs for like 4 hours or more at 100% brightness, if you're someone who is going to be using Lee or Roscoe color filters, if you're someone who's making like low budget films and you need those special lighting effects like the lightning or the TV screen, then the F7 Fold offers all that much better than the bowling P1s do. But the thing is, I don't use those. I don't use Lee or Roscoe color filters. Like I said, I've never outran the batteries on the bowling P1s for the scenarios that I'm shooting in. The build quality's never been a problem for me, and I've never once used the special lighting effects. But like I said, that's just me personally. So for anyone interested, I will leave links in the description box down below to both the F7 Fold and the bowling P1s that I use. Let me know in the comments section if you have any questions or queries, and if you found this video helpful or enjoyable, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and also consider checking out my Patreon account, where for just $5 a month you can help support the channel, and in return you'll get some exclusive behind the scenes content and access to some prize competitions as well. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.